Okay, starting from the top. When we're talking about sentences, and just basic simple sentences, I use this phrase independent clause a lot. An independent clause means that something has a subject and a predicate and it can stand alone as a sentence. So the definition of a clause is a subject and a predicate. Pretty much everyone has heard the term subject. Can someone tell me what a predicate is?
What he's doing?
Sorry, one more time, please.
The work that's done by subject.
Yeah, so the predicate includes the verb plus the stuff the verb controls. So it's usually an object, but not always. So for example, if I say, I love pizza, I is the subject. What's the predicate?
Love.
And pizza.
Love pizza. And pizza.
Okay, there we go. So predicate is the verb plus what the verb controls. So when we talk about problems like sentence fragments, often it'll be a subject with a missing predicate, or it might be a predicate with a missing subject. We'll get to those in a couple minutes. That's a simple sentence. That's all it is. I love pizza, period, is a simple sentence. Next level of complexity is what we call a compound sentence. Compound sentence is simply an independent clause and an independent clause with a coordinating conjunction in the middle. Now, the coordinating conjunctions are known by the acronym SOIBAN. Okay, these are all 2 3-letter words. You can just call these out if you know what they are. The first one is so. What are the other ones? What does O stand for? God. Or. Y stands
Yet.
for yet.
But. And.
Nor.
Good. Old-fashioned English, we would include for, which means because, but you're not going to use that and you're not going to see it these days unless you're reading Shakespeare. Okay, that's a compound sentence. Now we're getting into complex sentences. And this is what IELTS wants to see. So a complex sentence includes an independent clause and a dependent clause. So a dependent clause, just like an independent clause, also has a subject and a predicate. But it doesn't make sense by itself. So an independent clause would be, the weather is nice. Nothing wrong with this. It's a very simple sentence. Subject is the weather, is nice is your predicate. But as soon as you put a word like because in front of the weather is nice, it stops being a sentence. Like if I say because the weather is nice, your brain is going, so what? What happens when the weather is nice? Okay, we don't know. So that's not a sentence. If you write because the weather is nice, I will write down SF, means sentence fragment. Okay, so when you've got one of these dependent clauses, you also need an independent clause. So because the weather is nice, comma, we're going to the beach. Now you've got a complex sentence.
Sir, it is like in writing, is it, it look nice if we use because and because and these kind of words in the beginning of the sentence?
Okay, I'm really glad you said that. There are a lot of wacky English teachers out there that tell students not to start sentences with because. There is no such rule anywhere.
Mm.
Okay. Because the weather is nice, we're going to the beach. Or you can do, we're going to the beach because the weather is nice. No difference. It's completely your choice. There are stylistic reasons for putting the dependent clause first or second. If you put it first, put the comma before the subject. If you put it second, you don't need a comma, but you can put one in if you think it helps the reader understand. So especially with longer sentences, you might want to put one in, but for the most part, it's not needed. I suspect that some teachers tell students not to start sentences with because the students then don't put in the independent clause. They just do something like this. Okay, so this is no good. But as long as you've got an independent clause in there, that's perfectly fine. So this is actually the most common kind of complex sentence, and it includes what's called a subordinate clause. So this is a dependent clause, and it's specifically called a subordinate clause. It's called a subordinate clause because it begins with a subordinating conjunction. So subordinating conjunctions, the really common ones are the ones on this list. Because, although, since, while, you can have phrases like due to, unless, whatever, whenever, when. Okay, there are others. If can be included too.
So can,
As.
sorry, I'm cutting you. Can this compound sentence be the dependent clause as well?
Sorry, I missed the first part of your question.
The compound, if we talk about the compound sentence, can we make compound sentence like this dependent clause as well?
Well, you can have compound complex sentences.
Okay.
So you can have a complex sentence and another complex sentence, and you can join them together with a coordinating conjunction.
Between two depend like two. This, what is the name of the third clause? One is compound, another is complex.
Complex, yes.
Yeah. So in between two complex, we can join it.
Yeah, absolutely. You can have compound complex sentences. No problem whatsoever. The second most common kind of complex sentence contains a relative clause, and we'll just talk about type 1. There are several types that we cover in this course. In many textbooks, relative clauses are adjective clauses because they describe a person, place, thing, or idea, just like an adjective does. Okay, relative clauses start with a relative pronoun, and that's which, that, who, whom, and sometimes when and where. Okay, and it looks like this. My bike, which I got from my birthday, was stolen. Okay, this is the relative clause, which I got from my birthday. The relative clause needs to go directly after the idea it's related to. So this has to go after my bike. You don't want to say, my bike was stolen, which I got for my birthday. That's no good. The patient has a high fever and headache, which means he might have coronavirus. So this relative clause can describe the entire preceding clause. No problem. Okay, if you don't put the relative clause in the right place, it's what's called a misplaced modifier. So if we have a sentence like this, Peter is late already, who started working here last week. So that's no good. What does who refer to? What is who related to? It's a pronoun. It stands for
You started with
well, who is who?
Peter.
Peter.
yeah.
So this thing must go here, not here. Peter, who started working here last week, is late already. Who started working here last week relates to Peter, refers to Peter. That's why it needs to go here. In terms of punctuation, we have two kinds of relative clauses. We have ones that are non-defining and ones that are defining. So we just looked at this sentence. Peter, who started working here last week, is late already. We know who Peter is. This is a very specific subject. So who started working here last week is a detail. We put it inside commas. If we get rid of this detail, Peter is late already, we already know who you're talking about. Okay, there's no confusion. In contrast, we've got this sentence, the guy who started working here last week is late already. Notice there's no commas in this one. The reason is the subject is nonspecific. So if we delete the relative clause and you just say the guy is late already, I don't know which guy you're talking about. We need this info to know who you're talking about. The guy who started working here last week is late already.
So
The same,
don't
yep, go
need
ahead.
comma after guy.
So no commas in this case. And
Why?
when you read it out loud, you're not going to pause either. You're not going to say the guy who started working here last week is late already. You're naturally going to
Why?
read this whole thing through. The guy who started working here last week is late already.
Because the subject is unknown. That's why we don't have to put the comma.
That's right. You need this information in the relative clause to understand which guy you're talking about. So if it's a critical piece of information, you're not going to put it in commas. If this is needed to know which guy, don't put it in commas. But if this is just an extra detail, if the subject is already crystal clear, use commas. Peter, who started working here last week, is late already. Those are natural pauses. It's the same for stuff. So we use who for people. I say the machine that we bought last week is broken down already. I can say that, or I can say which, but the machine is non-specific. We need this piece of information to know which machine you're talking about. But if it's a specific machine, the X501, which we bought last week, that's an extra detail, has broken down already. You're going to put the commas in. If it's a situation with no commas, you can use that or which. Doesn't matter. If it's a situation with commas, do not use that. It's wrong.
And then when you use it without comma, you just read straight away with no pause.
That's correct. The machine that we bought last week is broken down already. The machine which we bought last week is broken down already.
Okay.
The relative clause looks like it's a dependent clause, isn't it?
Sorry, say again?
Because the example we are going through.
Mm-hmm. This is a dependent clause, yes. The relative clause is a dependent clause. Let's talk about semicolon sentences. Grammar is pretty easy. These are really important because the conjunctions in these are often confused with subordinate clauses. So these ones and these ones, parts of them often get confused. So how to use a semicolon? Essentially, it functions like a period. Both sides of the semicolon must be independent clauses. So it separates two sentences that can be sentences on their own. But the second part of a semicolon sentence begins with a conjunctive adverb. Okay? So this is the third kind of conjunction we're talking about. We talked about soyban, which are coordinating conjunctions. Okay. And the things that are highlighted here, these are the key terms. This is the grammar terminology that you should know. Okay, so we've got coordinating conjunctions, which join together compound sentences. We've got subordinating conjunctions, which begin subordinate clauses. And then we've got conjunctive adverbs, which begin these semicolon sentences. And by the way, you can start a sentence with any of these. You don't have to have a semicolon to start a sentence with any of these. Right? Got words like then, hence, therefore, or thus, however. Phrases like as well, which is a synonym for moreover, furthermore, instead, in contrast, besides, in addition, in comparison, oops. Additionally, meanwhile. Okay. You need to be familiar with these so that you don't confuse them with subordinating conjunctions.
So whenever we like write these words, we have to put semicolon before.
No, your choice is you can start a sentence with these. So this could be a period, and all these words could start with a capital letter. But instead of a period, you can use a semicolon, one of these words, then a comma, and then an independent clause.
So will you please repeat what you said?
One more time, please.
Yes, please, sir. Could you please repeat what you just said?
So this needs to be a simple sentence, or rather it needs to be an independent clause, something that can be a sentence on its own. Semicolon, conjunctive adverb, comma, very important, and then another independent clause goes after, period.
So if we put period, then after independent clause, then what should we do?
Oh, okay. You can do this, or you can do period, and
Yeah.
so you
After period, you have to
sorry, the audio is not great, so it's a little bit hard to understand.
So after period, we have to start from the capital letter?
Always. After a period, always, 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 the first word in a sentence must be capitalized.
Excuse me, yeah.
Independent clause, that's why I'm asking. If you say independent clause, even then we start with a capital one?
If you're using a semicolon, then no. Like the one I've highlighted right now, then absolutely not. Do not capitalize then. This is just a I'm not trying to overcomplicate this. This is just a really easy way to increase the variety of complex sentences in your work. Whenever you're using one of these words, okay, it's really common to, instead of using a period, use a semicolon.
Ian, can we use these semicolon sentences in official emails also?
Absolutely.
Even to whenever we send cover letters with resumes, can we use the same sentences? Is it accepted?
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, thank you so much.
The reason for doing this instead of using a period, we don't really have time to get into it, but it's for balanced sentences, like contrasting sentences. Okay. And that's kind of indicated, like, just think about the relationship between the ideas that's indicated by these words. Right, the second part is directly related to the first part. It's some kind of, you're looking for some kind of balance, some kind of contrast, some kind of comparison. That's why you would use these.
And it is always necessary that we put a comma after these words.
Always.
If okay. In
At the
both
at
cases.
in both cases, at the beginning of a sentence, yes, you must put a comma. Last thing I'm going to mention, because we've got less than a minute, a common mistake is to treat then like a coordinating conjunction. It's not on this list. So don't join together sentences using then. In the middle of a sentence, say and then. 2 words, and then. If you're using just then, it's for starting a sentence. In the middle, and then. Okay. All right, it's 9 o'clock. We'll continue with this on Saturday. Thank God it's 9 o'clock, because I think people's heads would just explode if we kept going with this. Okay, this is an ultra compressed grammar lesson. In the course, you've got a full grammar section. The lessons are short, I promise. It's not like an encyclopedia of grammar. I know everyone's seen too many grammar lessons in their lives, but in the course, let me just, last thing I'm going to show you where to find all this stuff that I'm talking about here. Okay. You want to open up the side menu and just everything here. G is for grammar, CS is for complex sentences. So you've got all kinds of lessons here on verb tenses, and then CS is where we're starting today. I would start with complex sentence essentials. There's a few lessons there, and I promise I've made these as short as I possibly can without leaving out anything critical. There are some short exercises in here as well. You have to know everything that's in this. There's nothing exotic, there's nothing fancy. This is the meat and potatoes of sentence structure. Okay, so we've covered the basics today. The basics, and we'll continue on Saturday.